So next up, we have Jacqueline Shea Murphy, who's an associate professor at UC Riverside in the Critical Dance Studies program that I'm enrolled in. And she's helping me out tremendously as the chair for the project that I'm working on. She's also written a book called The People Have Never Stopped Dancing, Native American Modern Dance Histories. It's a prize-winning book that has really helped to bridge this gap or bring some of the indigenous performances into the dance studies sphere, I guess, or purview. In 2009, she was the recipient of a Fulbright Senior Scholar Award to Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm terrible with that word, sorry. Where she studied with renowned contemporary Maori choreographers and dance leaders. And she's currently writing a new book that looks at ways that contemporary indigenous choreographers in the US, Canada, and Aotearoa are inhabiting indigenous epistemologies in their dance making as a tool for revitalizing indigenous knowledge systems. And she's going to be speaking today about the work of a choreographer, 2 pieces, and then just her own experience as an audience member and a participant as a Fulbright scholar.
Thanks. Thank you. I'm going to stand up because I have some images, and that way I can see them too. So thank you. I should say that I'm not a scholar of food and dance, particularly. Everything I know I learned from talking to Melissa and having really intense and exciting conversations with her. So my work is on indigenous performance, contemporary indigenous performance, but in thinking about it through the lens of food, I've had a number of insights and exciting conversations with the performers that I really have enjoyed. So thank you for the invitation to come here because it's provoked some thoughts in me. So I'm just going to talk briefly about 3 different events. 2 are performances by this dancer choreographer whose name is Tanya Lukeen Linklater, and another is, as Melissa said, an anecdote from my own experience. Tanya is an Alutiiq choreographer originally from Kodiak Island, Alaska. She now is working in Northern Ontario. She's been in Edmonton in Canada. She actually lived here for a while and went to Stanford, so she's a Bay Area dance person too, in a certain sort of way. This piece is called Women in Water, and it was performed in Edmonton and also at UCLA, where I saw it. It deals with issues of subsistence issues in Alaska, as well as sort of economic instability in a capitalist economy that I think maybe some of us are familiar with. Also, as an artist and as a Native person, particularly for her. The piece involved strawberries or blackberries, berries, and also in the Edmonton versions, it involved salmon, canned salmon as well. And what she did just briefly, it was a site-specific work, a very simple score. She would come to a space, clear the space of debris, leaves, sticks, etc. Slowly lay out sheets or blankets, clearing a space, making them into a kind of nest. And then she would kneel on the nest and wash the berries that she had brought with her. And in the performance I saw, she then took the berries and smeared them on her throat and arms, which you'll see in a minute, and moved out of that space and danced in some bird movements with the audience, and then moved up the audience, walked to a body of water, bridging land and water, walked into the water, invited individual people from the audience into the water with her, where she hugged us. I was one of them, and in the performance I saw, and sang to us a kind of lullaby, throat singing song. And after that part of the performance, came out and gifted the blankets and as well as the bowl that she had washed the berries in to some of us. It might look a little familiar from earlier this evening. That was the gift she gave to me at that performance. At the Edmonton performance, she also gifted salmon, cans of salmon, and the berries to people who she saw as, she said there was a time of where housing prices were really high and there were a lot of visibly indigenous or aboriginal homeless people living in the area where she was performing, so it was a literal gifting of food to the community. And what the piece was addressing or dealing with was creating a sense of, for however brief a moment of this performance, what it would be to be in relation to others in a community type setting or in a village type setting where you weren't dependent only on a kind of capitalist way of being in the world, that if you were behaving appropriately and in relation to those around you, there would always be food for you, there would always be a home for you. And so she was trying to create that sense of being within this performance for everyone to get to experience, everyone who was there to get to experience. And then also the food then became not exactly a prop, although I would say that the berries were also prop-like, and in putting them on her body, she was addressing questions of embodiment and, you know, gender or women's, being a woman who is, does a lot of labor to feed others and whose body becomes food when you're breastfeeding, but also the kind of labor that one does that's unseen and unpaid, of like making beds and preparing food and cleaning all the time. So it was a bit of all of that. So we can look just maybe briefly, there's just one other slide from these performances. Paul or whoever's up there, Patrick. Anyone up there? So here it is on the side here. You can see the berries on her arm and the fountain behind, and this one on the right is another performance of the more bird dancing movement. And then, so the next anecdote I wanted to move to see if these three can resonate together has to do with my time in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I was there learning what I could with and from Maori contemporary choreographers, and I took a kapa haka class for about 5 months with, as it turned out, the best kapa haka teacher in the world, because the troupe that he was the leader of had won the Te Matatini Festival just a month before. And the course, which had about 100 students, most of us were American, you know, abroad, living abroad people, involved learning songs, waiata, learned the protocol for moving into a marae space, the protocol for how to greet people, you know, waiata, karanga, hangi, all of the different things one does to come into performance space, as well as how to make the tools, the poi that we were learning to use, as well as the movements, of course. It was a kapa haka, a dance class. But one of the things that we had to do as part of this class was to organize ourselves to feed each other every class. It was a 3 or 4 hour class, and in the middle of it we had a tea break, and we were supposed to elect leaders who would be in charge each week of making sure we all brought food for each other, and particularly that we brought fresh milk for the tea. This is a former British colony. Tea with milk was very important. And so we were told this was what we had to do. And so the first few weeks, we all brought lots of biscuits and cookies and chips, and it was a lovely spread, and everyone did what they were supposed to do. And then a couple weeks in, you know, you figure you've done it before, and it kind of started to slack off a little. And then one week in particular, there was no milk. And Naupo, who's the teacher, who was an elder and a very revered leader in the field, was going up for his tea, and with no milk, the tea really wasn't drinkable, acceptable, part of what one could have with one's cookie. And so we all got a little nervous, but we sort of pretended we didn't really notice, and it was okay, you know, and then somebody ran out to the dairy, and then 10 minutes later we got milk, and Naupo got his tea, and you know, it was really, we went on with our show, or not show, we went on with our learning, and then at the end of the session, the teacher, who was his daughter-in-law, you know, told us we were doing great on the waiata, we were doing great on the poi making. We needed to talk about the tea. This was not okay. This was not okay. This class was not about learning how to sing, you know, kamate, the rugby haka that most people, or the only one people know, or we learned several others, many others. This class was about learning to come into relationship with one another, to take care of each other. The tea was not ancillary to what we were doing. It was central to what we were doing, and that we needed to organize ourselves better to take care of each other. And that was it. Then we were sent off with our scolding. And that has really sat with me throughout a lot of this, of what the, thinking of food and dance as not separate and not metaphorical and not a prop necessarily, but something that is central to the way that dance is learned. in this context. So that's my second anecdote. My third, do I have time? My third is another performance by Tanya just about a year ago. We can go to the next slide. This was the Mapping Resistances Festival outside of Peterborough, which is near Toronto, in Canada. And this was a piece that involved the props of milk and honey. And it was made in response to Refuge Rock, which was a central traumatic colonization event, one could say, I suppose, in Alaska in the late 18th century, 1784, something like that, where Russian colonists, it was killed over 500, or almost 500 men, women, and children, and captured thousands, and it sort of began the incorporation of the Kodiak Island, Alaska, where Tanya is from. And in this piece, she was out also site-specific on the river. It began by she was laying on a tree, moved very slowly in a conscious way to a body of water where she had buckets of what turned out to be milk laid out. And as the next slide will show, she then had someone, this is her walking, so I guess it's 2 slides in. That's me in the middle there. Had people throw milk at her so that it was like hitting her in a quite violent way, and you could tell that she had to keep her balance, and she was in different dance positions, sort of arabesque here, and in the next slide, I think it's a bit of a second position kind of stance. And then from here went into the water, washed herself with a cloth from a parka, an Alaskan parka. And I think there's one more, yeah, I think that's a beautiful picture. And then I think the next one shows her washing. And then she walked from here into the woods, about, I don't know, about 100 feet or so, and where there was a bowl of honey, and took the honey, I think maybe the next one will show this, and smeared it all over her body again. And the violence of the food in this instance became very apparent, the uncomfortableness of it, the way that, from my understanding from talking with her and from being there, the way that the sort of colonial or colonizer desire for the land of milk and honey as this place of wonderful abundance that could just be taken has both affected her when it's been thrown at her, this desire for milk, and as a woman who has children and is has other relationships to milk, it's a particularly complicated space for her, she's mentioned, and then also to put it on herself, these as an act of internal colonization that might come from putting on something that was desired by others, and also bees as, have colonies themselves. And that was, I think there's one more slide here. One of the interesting things that happened is as this stuff with food was going on, the mosquitoes were coming out, so we were all getting turned into food also. As you can see, the woman here is like slapping her leg, and there was a lot of, how is food seen? How is it being, how is the desire for its availability violently enacted, and what is one's relationship to that going on and circulating in my interpretation and from what she's mentioned to me in these works. So I think they're in different ways trying to physically experience for herself and for the audience through the use of food what different relationships to subsistence or living in relationship to food that one can have, whether it's one of respect, where there's a relationship between humans and non-humans who are getting food and tending to each other and respectful of how that food is gathered and how it's distributed, versus a kind of milk and honey desire for something outside of it, and the violence of that that's getting articulated as well as experienced by her and to some extent by the audience through the food presence here. So that's what I see happening in these works, and I'll end it there. Thank you.
Fabulous. All right. So let's see, shall we regroup once more? There's a lot of choreography going on here.